So good evening and welcome. My name is Lisa Connery. I'm the Director of Guidance here at Algonquin. I'm glad you could join us this evening. We got lucky. We have nice weather out there, relatively nice, I think, for this time of the year. The moon's beautiful. We've had nights where we've been under the polar vortex at 0 degrees and had Patriots games competing with our presentation. So I think tonight is a nice night. So thank you so much for coming out and joining us. Before we start the presentation, I would like to take an opportunity to introduce our counselors. For some of you, this may be the first time that you're actually going to begin really interacting with your student's counselor. So I think it's always nice to be able to put a face with a name. Of course, we have gone through some transitions, as you probably noted in the emails I sent out. In first semester, we had two of our long-time counselors take positions in other schools for different reasons. So I can honestly say that the first semester in guidance has been a bit of a whirlwind, but we survived. And I would like to personally thank the counselors who were left here to help provide coverage: Pam Mackey, Linda Hutchins, and Andrea Hodgkin. So I thank you all for the tremendous work that you've done the first semester of this year providing support. And I am excited that now we are fully staffed and we're welcoming 2 new counselors. So before we get, I'll introduce the counselors. Here to the left, we have Pam Mackey. Next to her is Linda Hutchins. And then Andrea Hodgkin. We have Cindy Nelson, who has now assumed Jason Lassard's caseload. And we have Denise Brianzi joining us, who is assuming Dave Breglio's caseload. Kate Mulcahy has also returned from maternity leave, so we're excited about that as well. But of course, she's not here this evening because that transition, leaving her little girl, is new, so she's at home tonight. But she is in the office and ready to support you and your student. So this week, we have been doing workshops with the juniors, and our focus is on post-secondary planning. So we met with the students during their history classes and for 2 different days. Some of the work that we did with the students, first we started talking with them about, what is a good fit for them. We had them read some articles and start to reflect on, what might be right for them after high school. Of course, for many of our students, that includes college, whether it's a 2-year school or a 4-year school. For some of our students, that might include maybe a vocational or a trade program, might be the military or work. So we had a lot of discussion with the students about next steps and what is the best fit for them. Starting to kind of encourage them to reflect on their interests, their passions, and where they see themselves after high school. So throughout the workshops, we covered a variety of different information. One of the things that we did have the students do is we had them actually review their transcripts, right? And we talked with them about their GPA. We wanted to make sure that their transcripts were accurate and explain to them how the GPA works and the GPA that we're going to be sending off to the colleges. So right now, their GPA consists of their grades from 9th and 10th grade. And it includes final grades for all of the courses that they have taken here at Algonquin. We use that information in Naviance, which we will show you as we work through the presentation tonight. When, at the end of the year, we will recalculate the GPA, and that will include final grades for 9th, 10th, and 11th grade, and that is the GPA that we will be sending off to the colleges in the fall. We won't recalculate the GPA at that point until after graduation, because of course it is based off final grades for all of the courses they have taken, but we do explain to the students that we send off senior grades, and we just kind of give them a little highlight of what's to come. We'll go back over this information in the next couple workshops that we present to you and your students, okay? We also had the students complete a student preference sheet, kind of sharing with their counselor what they think they might like to do. whether that is college and what they're looking for in a college, whether it's location or size or major. If they're looking for work opportunities, if they're looking for vocational opportunities, or they're interested in the military. That helps us to start to develop a plan for your student. The counselors will begin kind of working on college lists and pulling program ideas together for your student. And then next week, we're going to begin individual appointments where we meet with students and we start kind of reviewing some of those preferences and developing those lists and those programs and helping them to come up with a plan to kind of start exploring those opportunities. And as parents, that's really where you're going to come into play. Parents will often ask us, like, what can I do to help support my student? And I think the greatest thing that you can do as a parent is really to engage them in the process and get them out to the schools, to the programs, so they have an opportunity to actually see firsthand what do those programs and schools have to offer. Are they a good fit for your student? I think that is the single greatest thing you can do, because eventually we're going to get to a point where we're going to begin the application process, right? We're going to begin those next steps. And if students have visited campuses, it makes it easier for them to kind of narrow that list down and focus some of that work that they're going to be doing. So we start this process early in January with you and your students so that you have plenty of time to look at your calendar, to look at the school vacations that we have coming up, to consider the summer as travel time, all right? And to really begin that process so that come the fall, your student has a pretty good idea of what it is that they're, looking for, where they'd like to apply, and we will walk you through that entire process. We'll have a presentation in May where we'll talk about things that your student can work on over the summer. We'll have a presentation in the fall where we'll walk you through the application process and how we handle everything. So we'll cover the nuts and bolts of all of that. What we can't do is kind of put your child in our car and drive them to the campuses, right? So that's where we really need parents to kind of, organize their student and organize some of those trips and those visits, all right? So, in your workbook, we handed you out a workbook. We're going to be referencing that tonight. Every time we hand out a workbook, we have a timeline in there. And we highlight some different things that you should be kind of checking off, boxes you should be checking and things you should be accomplishing throughout the months. A couple things to highlight in there is the college admissions panel on Thursday, February 29th here in the auditorium at 8:15 in the morning. We're going to be having the entire junior class down, and we're inviting parents to join. We have 3 admissions counselors typically who come in and they share a wealth of information with our students about the admissions process and what they could expect. So that's always a very informative presentation that we have, and we invite you to join us. You can put that on your calendar. And then I had already mentioned the one in May that we will be holding to talk about things that you can do over the summer. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to turn it over to the counselors. We're going to start talking about different things, whether it is, standardized testing, interviews, resumes. We will touch base on course selection, and we're also going to introduce you to the program that we will be utilizing with your students called Naviance as part of the college search process, and we also use that as part of the application process. Okay, so I think first and foremost, I'm going to hand this off to Andrea Hotchkin, and she's going to begin by talking about testing. So welcome, Andrea.
All right, welcome everybody. This is actually a really pretty big crowd. I was surprised to see so many people here. It's nice, thank you. I just want to make a point. Lisa had mentioned we can't take your kids in the car and go on visits. However, if somebody wants to go to Puerto Rico or Hawaii, I'm happy to accompany your child. One of my students today was like, I want to go to Puerto Rico and Hawaii. I'm like, all right, take me. So, all right. So I am starting talking about standardized tests. And Basically, there are two tests out there. There's the SAT and the ACT. These have been around forever, okay? Basically, what I want to say, though, is at this point, colleges will look at either SAT or ACT. They view them equally. They do not have a preference one over the other. When I was growing up, ACT was more of a Midwest and West Coast thing, whereas, and I'm a Midwest person, so shout out for that. And for Mrs. Nelson from Ohio. All right, so I'm just getting sidetracked here. Okay, I'll get back to it. All right, so SAT used to be pretty much all East Coast, all right, but now they'll take either test, colleges will. So both tests are curriculum-based, and they do serve as indicators of students' critical thinking and their analytical skills. That being said, they are not the same test. So I'm going to take a moment to really go through how they compare. So I did put a couple charts up here, which are also in your workbook on page 4. All right, so this is going to go over some of the similarities and differences. So you're going to see that it says digital SAT. So recently, College Board discontinued the paper version, so as of March, there are no more paper SATs. The ACT is offered both digital and paper at this point. The primary differences, though, is if you look at this chart, is really in the structure, the pacing, and the scoring. So you're going to see, in terms of structure, SAT is comprised of 2 sections. There's a reading and writing that's combined, and then there's a math section. ACT, on the other hand, has 4 sections. You're going to see reading and English, math, as well as science. There's also an optional writing section. In 2021, College Board got rid of the essay part of the SAT. Very, very few colleges are actually looking for the writing on the ACT. In fact, Linda, if you can do me a favor, you can click on that link. I included up here, these are the only schools in the country that either require the ACT writing, so there's only 3. And then there's only 4 colleges that explicitly say on their website that they recommend students take the ACT with the writing. All right, I'm just pointing this out because it's very rare that students need to take the ACT with the writing. So our students are typically just doing ACT without the writing, and then they're paying less for the test, and it's a shorter test for them. All right, so if you want to just click to the next, I'm going back to the original chart. So we went over the structure. Now I'm just going to talk about the length of the test because that is another big difference at this point. They used to both be around the same length, 3 hours roughly. Now the SAT as a digital version, it's only 2 hours and 14 minutes, and it also only has 98 questions. So that's like less than a final exam. ACT, on the other hand, you're going to see 215 questions, close to 3 hours for that. So because the ACT includes so many more questions, students really have less time for each question. So it moves very quickly, approximately 45 seconds per question. Students have to move along. If students do not handle like time pressure well, I would say the ACT is going to be a much more challenging test for them. SAT, you have more time. You have over a minute per question really to go through that. Although you have more time, I would say in general, the SAT, the questions are a little bit more challenging in nature. You do have more time with that. All right, so the third main difference really is the scoring, right? SAT has 200 through 800 for each section, so students would get 200 through 800 for reading, writing, as well as 200 through 800 for math, for a combined score out of 1,600. ACT, completely separate scores. It's actually 1 through 36. The way they do that is every section, all 4 sections are scored that way, and then students receive a composite score, the average of those 4. If students do take that writing section, it's completely a separate score, so it's not even factored into that composite. It's scored on a scale of 2 to 12. Colleges will say, you know what, if a student takes the ACT with writing, sure, we'll look at it, but it's not going to be that big of a factor because they're not requiring it at this point. Okay. So the next slide compares the content of the exam. So there's a lot of similarities. They both have reading, okay? They both have math, and they cover roughly the same type of math, and they also allow you to use a calculator on every part of the math sections. The main content difference is really the ACT has a science section. I think some students were getting worried about that, like, I don't remember what I did in bio or chem, and it's really not testing scientific knowledge. The science section on the ACT is really to assess how can a student interpret data, how can they read graphs, how can they read research summaries. So they're really looking at how students apply that knowledge. All right, so as I mentioned before, College Board got rid of the paper SAT. Raise of hands, how many of your students already took the SAT on paper? Okay. All right, so at this point, I'm just gonna highlight some of the differences. Really, it's shorter, as I said, 3 hours, now it's 2 hours and 14 minutes. Students have a lot more time to answer the questions. Students can use calculator now on the whole section. It used to be only one section, students could have calculators. Score release, you can get scores within days versus weeks, okay? So those are some really good benefits. Something that is, I think, gonna be hard for students to get used to is it's an adaptive test, all right? So the way this works is that every section, so there's the reading and writing, that's divided into 2 modules. The math section is also divided into 2 modules, all right? So the way this is gonna happen is students are gonna answer a set of questions in the first module before they move on to that second module. The first module consists of a range of questions, easy, average to difficult questions. Now the second module, what's gonna happen is it's gonna change for each test taker, and it depends on how they performed on that first module. So in other words, the second module will either be easier or harder depending on how they performed on that first section. All right, so students should always do their best on that first section. I was reading the numbers earlier today. If you score well on that first section and you move on to that second section that has more difficult questions, you could potentially get out of an 800 on that section. If you do not move on from that first module to the harder one, but you go maybe to relatively easier questions, the maximum you can get on that section is 600. Right? So I think this is going to be something that's going to be very different for our students. They're not used to doing this, but it is the reality of how the SAT is. All right, so now that we know the difference really with those tests, how does a student decide what test to take and how to prepare? I usually say the best way is to do practice tests online. Both College Board, which runs SAT, and the ACT organization, they will have free practice tests on their website. I think College Board actually has 8 free ones. So I think if students sit down, do a timed full-length test, they'll see what they're more comfortable with. For the SAT, students can download something called the Blue Book app. The Blue Book app is actually what students will be using when they take the SAT digitally. So it's good to get that practice. Students can also link their PSAT scores if they've already taken that. They can link that to Khan Academy to get individualized preparation. There's a lot of other organizations like Kaplan, Princeton Review. There's tons in the area that offer prep classes. And then if you're looking for a private tutor, we also have names and guidance. You can contact your student's guidance counselor. We can provide you with some names of private tutors that will do either SAT or ACT. The last thing I want to mention with the test prep is Shrewsbury High School is offering a class. You're going to get an email tomorrow from Algonquin Guidance with this information, but it's going to be a remote class. You'll have 7 sessions, and it starts February 12th and runs through April 1st. So students, if they want to sign up, the registration information will be in that email you get tomorrow. And it is a first-come, first-served basis, so I would definitely recommend signing up for that as soon as possible if you're interested. There is a cost for that, and that is $300 for non-Shrewsbury residents. Okay. All right, so a common question I get is, when should my child take these tests and how do they register? All right, so the next 2 slides are also on page 5 of your workbook, but they do include the registration dates and deadlines for both SAT and ACT. So students register online directly through those websites. On the pages, you're gonna see an asterisk or also in red on the chart. Those dates are dates that Algonquin is a test site, all right? So if we're not a test site, typically schools nearby, I know several students are signed up for the March SAT, and most of the ones I've talked to, they're taking it at Westboro High School. I always say pay attention to these deadlines because, one, you want to avoid the late fees, but also you want to get a seat at Algonquin or nearby. Earlier this year, I had a senior who was not planning on taking SATs at all, and he found a school that actually needed him to take it. He went to register, everything in Massachusetts was full. He ended up driving up to Vermont to take the SAT. And so, I mean, that happens. So it's just, I'd say, if your students have a plan of taking tests, we want to make sure that they're registering. You already know the deadlines, and registration is available. And the ACT, one thing I do want to mention is, even though the ACT is digital and paper, we're going to be offering just the paper version here during that June exam. Okay. Maybe in the future, I don't know, but in June, we are doing paper. Okay. So as we meet individually with our students, that's something we're going to be starting to do. We will help them make a timeline of what makes sense for them, like which tests to take, when should they be taking them. A lot of times it depends on what math class they're currently in. But we'll work with them on that, and we can share that information with you. But I would say most of the time, our juniors typically take their first SAT in May or June, and that's because a lot of them are in Algebra 2, and by the time they take it in May or June, they would have had close to a full year of math. So that's usually our recommendation, and then for ACT, usually April or June would make sense for them. If a student does take both tests, what we'll do in the fall is we can work with the student, look at how they did on either one, and maybe that student takes the test again, whatever they did best on, they'll take it again to see, can I improve with additional preparation? All right. The last thing I do want to mention just about registration is anytime a student registers for College Board or ACT, you're going to have an option to send your scores to colleges. It is way too early to do that right now, so I would just ignore that piece. When we come back to school next year, in September, we're going to have some workshops with all the seniors, and we're going to go through the process of how all this stuff gets sent to the colleges. So for now, just ignore sending scores. I am almost done with testing, but before I move on, I do want to just talk about test optional schools, because I think it's really important for students to understand that tests are just one component of an application, and for a lot of schools, it's not a component at all. There is a website called fairtest.org, and that's going to list colleges and universities all throughout the country that do not require the SAT or ACT as part of their main admissions decisions, okay? Right now, there's over 2,000 colleges on that list. Prior to COVID, there were close to 1,000 colleges. Throughout that pandemic, you could see almost 1,000 more colleges joined this whole movement of test optional, all right? So from what we're seeing, a lot of schools continue this practice. They like this idea that, test scores don't necessarily indicate your level of success, okay? What's going to happen with schools that you don't send test scores, it just forces these colleges to look at students more holistically. So they're going to place more emphasis on course selection, so the strength of a student's schedule, the student's GPA. They're going to pay attention to things like extracurriculars, community service. They're really going to look at the personal essay. All right, we'll be talking more about that later, but I do just want to point out, I think with the test optional, students benefit from a college being able to look at these other parts of them that make them equally successful. I would always say, even though all these colleges are test optional, always check the college's website, because if they do have any policy changes, they will be reporting that directly on that. All right, so I covered a lot with testing. We'll talk about testing every workshop, but it will be much less and less. So I'm going to hand this over to Linda, and she's going to introduce you to Naviance, which is our college planning tool.
Okay, good evening. I am Linda Hutchins, and I am going to give you an overview of Naviance. So to start out with, Naviance is our college planning tool, and it's designed to help students. They're going to be able to conduct college searches, assess their fit for a college, and also research and get a lot of information on the colleges. It's an online platform, and it has some really great features. So I'm excited to be able to showcase them for you tonight. To get started, I just wanted to say that we sent an email to parents on July 1st giving you access login credentials to Naviance. This was so that you could go in and check your child's GPA. If you're able to get into Naviance, that's great, but if you need us to reset your password, all you have to do is email your individual counselor, child's counselor, and we will easily be able to do that for you. If you actually have more than one child in high school, we can also link each of their accounts. So when you go to log in, you can toggle between their accounts. So just let us know if we can help you with that by email, and it's really easy, and we can do that for you. So for students, we actually showed them and began showing them how to log into Naviance. So we're gonna show you tonight, just in case they need a little help. So we're gonna start on the Algonquin website, and then we are going to have us go to the academic section, and then to the guidance section. And then on the left-hand side, you're gonna go ahead and select Naviance. And so at this point, they're gonna select the backpack. Oh, yep, they're gonna log in. And so they're gonna select the student in the backpack. And so at this point, we have linked up Naviance's login with their school email. So all they have to do is select this continuous single sign-in. They don't need a password, they don't need to put in their email or anything like that. Now we are on the homepage. Oh, soon we'll be on the homepage. And this is we have a fictitious student that we use called Cristobal. So I'm just gonna acclimate you with the homepage to begin with. So in the upper right-hand corner, you'll see her initials, and this is where you can get your account information. So in the account, you're gonna go to the general information first, and if you scroll down, you'll be able to see the weighted GPA. And again, like we said, right now, it's their 9th and 10th grade grades, and then at the end of next year, before we leave for summer, we will update the 9th grade, 10th grade, 11th grade cumulative GPA for the juniors. And then while we're here in the account, something I want you to look at the first time you go into Naviance is you could see the parent information, and just make sure that your email is correct in there. So when we send emails to your child, we will send them to you too. And you're gonna be getting a lot soon. And so the last thing under the account is the test score. So if they've taken their PSATs or they've taken an SAT, they can see their scores in this section too. So going back to the homepage for a minute, just right next to the account or their initials is the message. And we just wanted to say, we pointed out to the students this week too, that they need to begin to check their school email regularly, because we will be sending them a lot of information. In the summertime, we send an email every week, just helping them kind of stay organized and what they can do that week to help them get ready for the fall. And so now, I want to direct you to the right-hand column, Welcome to Naviance. And every time we have a workshop, we put whatever we're doing in that workshop in that section. So as you can see, there's the post-secondary preference sheet that Mrs. Connery talked about earlier. And we wanted every student to fill this out, regardless of what they wanted to do, whether they wanted to look at four-year colleges, two-year colleges, trade schools, military, gap years. We said, whatever you think you might want to do, fill it out. You didn't have an option of one or the other. You could fill out anything you wanted. And then we will work with them individually on each of those options for them. And obviously they can change their mind and add things later, but we just want to make sure that we give them every area that they're interested in. Okay, sorry, one second. Oops, sorry, there we go. And again, so for students that are interested in trade schools and construction or work opportunities, we provided search engines for them right over here in that section also. We also told students how they could find their GPA, and we also added in a resume template for them. So now I want to direct you to the top where there's the 5 tabs. And we are going to be looking at the college tab tonight. So in the college tab, There's 3 sections. There's the Find Your Fit, the Research Colleges, and then Apply to Colleges. This year, we are going to be looking at Find Your Fit and researching colleges. And then next year, we will take the colleges that they're interested in, that working list that we've asked them to develop, and we will put them in the Apply to Colleges and kind of go over that nuts and bolts that Mrs. Connery was talking about. So when we talk about the Find Your Fit tab, we are going to have them go in and do an advanced search. We ask students to begin with to kind of do a broad search. We don't want them eliminating colleges right off the bat because they were too particular to begin with. So when we're in the college search, the first section is type. So they can they can look at 2-year colleges, they can look at 4-year colleges, and again, everything they put in will kind of filter out and give them a list of the schools that they're looking for. They can select public schools or they can select private schools. Public schools are subsidized by the state. Private schools are subsidized by their own endowments. One thing I would like to mention about the public schools, sometimes those are the larger flagship institutions of the state. If you are applying to an out-of-state public institution, it might be a little bit more selective for students from Massachusetts if they're applying to a different state, and it also might have a higher cost associated with it too if you're applying out of state. Just some things to consider. And then the other tab we're looking at here is campus surroundings. What is going to be the right fit for your child? I have 2 children myself, and we've gone through this process, and they both looked at totally different schools. One couldn't wait to get to like a Division I big campus and have everything going on. And the other one really needed a smaller campus to be successful. And one felt more comfortable in a rural setting, and one wanted to be right in an urban setting. So it's really whatever they want. And I always tell the students, you live in Northborough, Southborough, which you're very fortunate to live in, but this is your first chance to figure out where do you want to go. So really take some time to figure that out. Do you want to go to a big city where there's going to be things on campus, but so many other things available outside of the campus? Or is that going to intimidate you or make you feel not safe? Are you a person that wants to be able to go out into nature? Do you love snow? Do you want to ski? Do you love sun and you want to go south? So we really wanted them to start to think about where they want to go and what is right for them. For today, we're just going to leave that blank. And we're going to put in 4-year college and we're going to put in co-ed. Then we're going to move on to the next one, which is location. Okay. So anywhere in the United States they want to go, and Canada. I have told students, I'm like, do it by region. You can do so many multiple searches, break it down. Otherwise, when you get done with your search, you may have 300 or 400 colleges, and it's so overwhelming to look at a list like that. But if you just have a college of, say, or a list of 20, you can kind of go through and say, oh, I've heard of that school. I want to look at that school. My friend went to that school, and then they can kind of start researching the schools. So today we're going to just do a search for the New England. The next tab is enrollment. And so this is how big or small a school is. So we started out by talking about how many students are at Algonquin. A little less than 1,400 students. How do they feel about the size of Algonquin? Then we also talked about they're going to be divided into tabs. So it's like 2 to 5,000, 6 to 10,000. I said, we always tell them to overlap, because if you have a school of 5,000, school of 6,000 probably is going to feel the same way. So we always tell them to kind of go one above and one below what they think is their Goldilocks size. So for tonight, we're going to go ahead and we're going to select 2 to 5, 5 to 10, 10 to 15, and 15 to 20. I'd also like to point out, too, that some schools, sorry, my papers got messed up. Some schools like UConn, I'm just going to take that for example, they have a big university and they have colleges within the university. So the business college only takes about 500 students every year. So the whole entire college at UConn for business is about 2,000 students. So rather than eliminating schools right now before you do the research, keep it kind of broad and general, and then you can look to see what school's right. Because some of those larger universities really do make it seem like a smaller fit eventually. I'm sorry, I apologize. Okay, here we go. The next tab is going to be admissions. So this tab is about how selective a college is for admissions. We are going to leave this blank for today, and this is why. We have asked all of the students to start creating a list, a balanced list of reach, target, and safety schools. This is going to ensure them that they have lots of options next year to choose from. And in doing so, they're not going to eliminate a school right now because, oh, I'll never get into that school. We are just going to say, where does it fit on your list? So we're encouraging them to have 1 or 2 safety schools. They want to have that one drop-dead safety financial school so we know they're going somewhere. And this is really important. They can't just pick a school because they know they can get into it. They have to do their research and not only be able to get in, but want to go there. There's so many schools out there. They have to do their research on the safety schools too. Then we say, go ahead and select 4 or 5 targets. This is where your credentials, your GPA matches that school's admissions requirements, and you should be getting into those schools, but again, on any given year, there's not a guarantee. And then go ahead and go for 2 plus, whatever you want for the reaches, and then that would be your balanced list. And you'll be guaranteed to get in places, and then you'll probably get into a lot more with the target. So for that reason, we've asked them not to take away schools at this point on the enrollment. So we're gonna go to the next tab, which is athletics. And again, athletics is pretty straightforward. Do they wanna be a participant in athletics, Division 1, 2, or 3, or do they wanna play? If this is a deal breaker and they have to have a school that has certain athletics, then you put it in. If it's a want but not a need, then you can go ahead and leave it out at this point, and then you can look at the schools to see what they want. The next one is the major. This is an important one. Some students know exactly what they want, and they can go ahead and put that in. Other students may know, I'm not really sure, but I might want to do teaching, I might want to do business, I might want to do psychology. So you can go ahead and put all of those that they want. Those schools are going to have what you're looking for, can have all of those things, and then they haven't eliminated any of their choices at that point. So we're going to go ahead right now and put in physical therapy. And then what we tell students at this point in time is a whole bunch of things might come up. We say pick the general one. So we're just going to do physical therapy therapist. We're not going to do the assistant or the pre-studies, and we're going to add that and continue on. So the next 2 tabs, one is cost. So again, as we're being broad and we don't want to eliminate any, we're not going to eliminate any right now on the sticker price. Yes, that is important, but we're not going to eliminate anything right now. And then the last tab is special programs, such as ROTC, but if you look, you can also go ahead and select the preferences. And is there something that they love so much that they won't go to a school if it doesn't have it? If that is a yes, then you select it. If it's, oh, that would be really nice if they had a cappella groups, but I don't really know if I'm gonna ever join one, you would leave that off. So now we're gonna get to look at our list of what we have. And we have 10 matches. And we put in the 4 years, the co-ed, New England, the enrollment, and physical therapy. And at the bottom, you can see the schools. So at this point, they can go through and they can select certain schools. Oh, first of all, Andrea, sorry, can you go back up? You can save it. So you can save this search, and what we recommend is putting PT, New England, and the date. Today's date is the 25th. And so then they can go back and look at this anytime that they want. And then you can go ahead and you can select any schools that you want to start thinking about and learning more about. And then you can go up after you select a couple, and you can add it to the colleges you're thinking about. So after we gave them a search like this, in the workshops, we had them go back into the homepage and do their preference sheet. So they actually had all of these questions we just had, and they were giving them to us as their counselor. And what we are going to do now, where you see on the colleges they're thinking about, where it says added by, you'll see students. And then we as counselors will go in and add schools too. Because some of us have been doing this a long time and we have a lot of suggestions for schools. And parents, you're gonna get to go in too, and you can add some in there too. So those are the kind of the three of us that will add things in there. Just to make sure we're all on the same page, just because we put one in there doesn't mean you have to go and visit it, doesn't mean you have to have it as an option. We're just giving you some choices to think about. And it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to get in either. So we're going to give them some targets, we're going to give them some safeties, and we might give them some low reaches to think about too. Okay, so let's look at this colleges we're thinking about page here for a second. So there's a lot of information on this page. I'm just going to kind of go over it. In our workshop in May, we're going to go over a lot more about applying to college, but while we're here, I just want to give you a quick view of it. So the first tab is the delivery type, and when it says CA, that means Common App. And you can apply directly to the institution, and a lot of schools now will let you use the Common App. And if we recommend that if they say Common App, we say use the Common App, because it's a much more efficient way to apply. So you get to put in all your own personal information one time, and then it'll automatically go into each application. And on the Common App, they have a tab for the school so they can have their specific questions too. So we like to see searches that come up with a lot of Common Apps. And so after this, you can see the application deadlines. And again, you can look at the dates, so you can kind of start to get organized, like when things would have to happen. But the biggest deadlines is early decision, early action, or regular decision. And whenever we talk about regular decision, I always think about BC. Boston College always comes every year to our admissions panel, and she says every year, she goes, regular decision is not late, it's regular. So it's just the last time you can apply to a school. And so early action means you can apply early and you can find out early. So you'll find out earlier than the regular decision people. And early decision is binding. So early action is not binding, but early decision is binding. That means the parent and the student and the school have an agreement that if you get in, you are going to go to that school. Okay, and so the next column that I really like to talk about is interest, and I love this column. I love it when the students give us this information. They don't have to, but it's really nice to have. What is your number one choice? Is this a school you really want to go to? Is it medium? Is it just low? That helps us out, and we can kind of strategize with them based on what we know. So now we get into some really cool features that are going to assess the risk. So go ahead and hit Compare Me. And you will see your student. And the thing I like about Naviance is it's all our local data. So we have data from the past 3 years, class of 2021, 2022, and 2023. And that is the data that you're seeing up here. So Crystal Ball's GPA is a 3.59. And Assumption, their average GPA is a 3.47. So hers is higher, so it's a green check mark. And then you see Bentley's is a 3.84, and so Crystal's is a little bit lower, so it's an X. I want you just to remember these are just numbers, because if you look at Babson, scroll down just a little bit, or Bryant, I'm sorry, it's a 3.6. And if you go up to Crystal Ball, all the way up, she's a 3.59. So it's an X, but it's 3.59 or 3.6. It's the same thing. So just remember that as you're going through these things. So now it also gives her test scores, and it also goes all the way over, and it gives her acceptances. These are the acceptances of students from the past 3 years. So for Assumption, we've had 52 students apply, and we've had 63 get in. So this is just, yeah, okay, reverse that. Okay. Okay. So anyways, it's just some information to give you. So if we go back now to the home, or the thinking about page for a second, I'm going to have us look at some colleges in particular. So we're going to just go into Assumption since it's on the top. And so when you go into assumption, there's some tabs at the top: the overview, the studies, the student life, the admissions, and the cost. So for the overview tab, you're going to find some really good information. First of all, 81% of our students have been accepted, 96% graduation rate. This is a great tool. 4 years, 96% of the students that go to Assumption graduate. So for all of us parents that are kind of paying for this, 4 years is a lot better than 5 or 6. So that's a really good number. And if we scroll down just a little bit, oops, Andrea, can you go back up? So on this one page, which for some reason, Naviance is a tad bit glitchy, it didn't show up. The overlap didn't show up. So we have another great feature that we're not going to be able to show you right now, but it's right on the overview. It's called the overlap. So if your child's like, I really like Assumption, but I don't really know what other schools I want to go to. This is one of the features that we have based on our past data, is that students that applied to Assumption, it's going to give you the top 10 other schools that most students applied to. And so you can go in there and you can look at that too. So it's just to give them an idea of some other schools to look at. And then, as you're scrolling down, it's going to give you some quick facts, and then keep going for a little bit, and this is what I really like. It's going to compare you to others who have applied to Assumption. And as you can see right there, it says this institution is a match. So it's going to tell you right there, is it a match, a reach, or a safety? So now we're going to kind of go back up top and go to the studies. And one thing I want to point out on this page too is that the student retention is 83%. And what that means is the number of students that actually went to Assumption and stayed as a freshman and then came back as a sophomore. And that's a big number. You want to make sure that students like the school and actually want to stay there for the whole 4 years. And so the job placement rate is out of 6 months, which is great. And then you can also look at the student faculty ratio. Again, some of the bigger institutions may have some of those introductory classes where they have 500 students in a lecture hall. Is this going to work for your student, or do they need a little bit more contact time with the teacher? And again, it's all about what's right and what works for them. Other things on this is you can scroll down and see their top majors, and then at the very bottom, you can see some other study options. And they're just going to list them here, but when Pam Mackey starts talking about the website and how you could go through a search there, she's going to go more into depth in some of these. The next one is student life. And again, it's going to tell you the size of the school, the nearest city, and then how many students actually live on campus. And again, you want to have a lot of students living on campus, a thriving, good social experience for your child too. We want to make sure that there's students there on the weekends, and they're going to have lots of things to do. And then it's going to talk about a little bit overview of information about the student body, and then it's going to give you information about clubs and organizations. And then we're going to get to the admissions tab, which has some really good information for you. Again, it's going to tell you about the admission rate of 81%. The application fee for Assumption is free. And then it gives you a chart, graph, of how many students have applied in 2023, how many applied in 2022, and how many applied in 2021. So again, 23 students applied in 2023. 20 students were accepted in 2023. And then 4 enrolled. So again, just some really good data from our school. Continuing down, we have the scattergram. And we love this. We spent some time on this with the students. It's that visual graph to show them. So if you look at the dotted lines, that is where our average students' GPA or testing information comes out for Assumption. And as you can see, our student, Cristobal, is the blue. And so she is right at the target. So anywhere around where those two meet, that is the target. And that would be a target school for them. They're right on track. If it's above that or higher than that, then that is going to be a safety school for them. And if they're underneath that, that is going to be their reach schools. So this is where they're going to have to use the data to come up with that balanced list so that they have lots of options. And as we scroll down a little bit further, it's going to talk to you about requirements for the application. And then I love this part too. If you scroll down just a little bit, here it is. This is going to talk to them about what they are looking for, recommended and required of the courses. And so course selection's coming up. And Lisa Connery will talk about that in just a minute, but this is a good spot for them to go on to Naviance as they're starting to build their schedule for next year. So if a college is like, one of their top colleges that they really want to go to says, we want 4 years of history, then they should take history next year because that would mean 4 years of history. And so they can use this information to help plan their schedule for next year. What is required for graduation is going to also give them a lot of options for what they want to take too. So now we're going to just really talk about the cost column. And this is just information. It's just information for you. Like you can't, it's not a guarantee, and colleges can't be held to this. It's just kind of to give you some information. I just want to make that very clear. But anyways, we went over a lot of things tonight. We talked about the advanced search. We talked about the preference sheet, scattergrams, overlaps, the compare me, a lot of data, a lot of information that you can use as you make your college searches, and just to give you how does your child fit into that reach, target, and safety balance list. And now Pam Mackey will come up and talk with you about the different websites. Thank you.
All right, hey everyone, thanks for coming out. Tonight I'm going to talk about visiting college campuses, and I'm also going to highlight important resources to explore when you're looking at college websites. But before we jump onto the Merrimack site, I want to talk a little bit about the importance of visiting. I know Lisa spoke about it in the beginning, and I just want to reiterate it again and again how important it is to get on those campuses. This is a really exciting time for the kids. I love to see them in the workshops, and I love this portion of how we get to work with them in this capacity. We can do so much with them, but really, I will tell you, that my students that come to me, end of June, and then when they come back in September, the ones that have gone on visits are usually the ones that are in the best shape. You can do online touring, you can look at websites, but there's really nothing like setting foot on campus. And it's so important, I think, for your children to actually see if they can actually picture themselves there. It helps them see what they want in the campus. It helps them look at what the other kids look like when they're on the campus. And as I move through the website, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the different types of visits and tips for getting the most out of your time on campuses. So I'm going to start by reviewing the visit page of the Merrimack website. On the home page on the side, you can see the visit tab, and we are going to be looking at undergraduate visits. So Merrimack offers in-person and virtual touring. We're going to start by looking at the in-person options. They have a combination 20-minute information session that's followed up by a tour. The information sessions at different schools will vary in time length. I've found that most of them are from 30 to 40 minutes, but 20 minutes at Merrimack. And then they're run by the school's admissions counselors, and materials covered in the information sessions include reviews of the program, the college, the admissions data, and application information. The tours themselves, it's a student usually who's going to take you through the campus, including dorms, classrooms, the library, and the student center. You'll have an opportunity in both the info session and the tour to ask questions. Again, when I talked to the students, I reiterated the importance of spending time on campus. And what I told them to do, and I'm going to hope that you can kind of echo this to them a little bit, is after the tour, instead of jumping in the car and taking off, have them walk around a little bit, just with you and them. Go back to the areas that they really, enjoyed, the parts of the campus that they liked, that they remember. Have them take pictures, have them take notes about those parts of the campus. I always tell, I tell the students when they come into the workshops, ask a student, I know this is weird, but ask a student, like, where's the best cup of coffee on campus? Where do kids go to eat? Is there like a pizza place that everyone goes to? And try to, spend some time in those areas, because that's where you're really going to get the real essence and of the life and the energy of what that school is. So we put in your workbook on page 12, there is a list of tips for visiting. And I'm just going to kind of highlight a few of them. I mentioned, food, but really that's what brings people together. So that's asking where the students gather. Taking a look at the bulletin boards. I remember this was a very long time ago, but I was visiting Northeastern and they had half-price Red Sox tickets, and I was like, this is where I want to go. What bands did they have? Like, that was something that I checked out. Did they have music outside? I was really curious about what the campus sports facilities were like. So if I was going to be going to a game, like a hockey game, where would that be? What comedians are coming? Did they have any speakers coming in? Really, and it's just, again, taking that time, that extra bit of time to sit in the commons, drink a soda, and just kind of soak it all in. A couple other things that I mentioned to the students, this is stuff that I don't think about anymore, but I urge the kids to go on the school's social media accounts, because if you think about it, that's where all that information is going to be, and it's going to really give you an authentic look at what's happening on that campus. I asked the kids, I was like, do you think that schools have TikToks? They're like, maybe, probably. So if you do see current students on campus, some of the things that you could ask: how many hours a week do you study? Where do you study? That's going to give you a sense of, is the library used? Are they in their dorm rooms studying? How is the food? Kids, your students are going to love doing the dining halls. It's always a lot of fun. Do students go home on weekends? That's a great question to ask, kind of going along the lines of what Linda was saying. You don't want to have your child end up traveling and then end up at a suitcase school, where most students are going home to their house, going to their parents' house on weekends. And then another question that you could ask is, how easy is it to get the course I want during course registration? That way you can sort of get a sense of how things run. Do things run smoothly at the school? That kind of thing. So if you're unable to visit a school in person, there's also virtual options. So if you scroll down the page, you can see an option for virtual information session. Virtual experiences are a great option when you're getting started. And also if you're looking at campuses that are outside of New England, keep in mind a virtual tour will never replace the same kind of feeling that you get as an on-campus tour. If you look, Merrimack offers a virtual information session and a virtual tour. So the virtual info sessions is pretty much the same as the in-person, but they're an excellent way. You can learn more about the colleges, the academic programs, the student life, and the admissions and financial aid process. After these sessions, you can do a virtual tour, which usually involves an interactive map, where you can kind of get a sense of, how the campus looks, and it's going to highlight some beautiful pictures probably of the campus, which is, again, why I always recommend, getting on campus and really just kind of walking around and seeing if your child can see themselves there. Some schools offer interviews, and Merrimack is one of them. Andrea is going to click on the interview page so you can see where to sign up for that. Cindy's actually going to chat more about interviews in a little bit, so I'm going to hold off on talking about those too much. I will say that if you are traveling farther away, this is an area that you want to check on the page. That way, like if you're down in Elon, because I'm pretty sure they actually do interviews, you can get in touch with them and have a face-to-face one down there. All right, so to find information on the admissions deadline, so you saw it on Naviance, now I'm going to just show you on the college websites. You can click on undergraduate admissions and then freshmen. You're going to scroll down and you're going to see the different admissions plans. Linda already covered early action, early decision, regular. So you can see, when those deadlines are for Merrimack. These are all really important pieces of information that I say build yourself a spreadsheet so you can start to have an idea of when things are going to be due. Deadlines are so important next year. So I think that's also helpful that you start to do that now, and that also really, really helps your child out. So on this page, it also shows an application checklist, and it shows what Merrimack considers. If you want to show nursing, so some of the other like schools within the school, nursing, engineering, they may be more competitive. Perhaps they take less students, and therefore they may have sort of tighter oh my gosh, I just completely, they may have different things that they're looking for in terms of GPA, in terms of test scores and courses. So I know with engineering, some schools are going to want to see certain math classes. And if you scroll down a little bit more, you're going to see the standardized testing admissions policy that Andrea was talking about. All the different websites have, different spots where you're going to find things. So I just want to give you a sense of it with Merrimack. We're going to click on academics, and we're going to see a list of majors, and we are going to go with finance. All right. So there's examples of hands-on experience opportunities. You can see a list of finance jobs and a list of courses. You can also see the course requirements and the sample curriculum guide. So if your child is interested in going into finance, and I told the kids this also, I urge them to please look at the courses that they're going to be taking. We want to make sure that they're interested in everything that's on there, and it's stuff that they can get excited about and see themselves taking. It's also helpful, if the child is interested in finance, we've got course selection coming up. What kind of things does Algonquin offer that could complement going into that major? All right. So the financial aid page is usually found under admissions, and you can find the cost of attendance. So you can find the cost of attendance here. You can find what forms are required. One of the best tools, though, that I really want to highlight here on all of these sites is the net price calculator. So all colleges have this tool. It allows prospective students to put their information in, and then the institution will calculate your personal information and give you an idea of what you're going to owe. So it will also give you a list, though, of any grants and scholarship aids that could be taken into account. All right. And then lastly, Student Life is going to show you all the clubs and athletics that are offered at the school. If you click on upcoming events, you can find, show up. See upcoming events. Yep. Thank you. So this kind of shows you, each night what's going to be happening at Merrimack. So it gives you a sense of the clubs, sports that are coming up, ski trips. All right. So thank you so much. I'm going to pass it off to Denise, and she's going to cover resume.
All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. Tonight, I'm going to share some information about resumes. For this, you can reference pages 14 and 15 in your workbooks. As part of our workshops with junior students this week, we discussed what resumes are, why they're important, and the types of information that should be included on them. Resumes can be extremely valuable documents for students to have for many reasons. They can be used to highlight information related to students' education, skills, accomplishments, extracurricular activities, and they can also help to create a professional image of the student. Looking at a resume's use in the short term, they can be used as part of the application process for summer programs and/or jobs that students may be interested in while they're still in high school. In terms of more long-term benefits, resumes can be used to supplement applications for colleges and vocational programs during senior year. We know that students will need to have resumes down the road as they apply for jobs, either right after high school or after they finish college or any other vocational program. As students get older, these resumes will obviously change as they add different experiences, but creating one now will give them a good foundation to work off of later on. Additionally, once students begin to ask for letters of recommendation to be used in their applications for colleges and vocational programs, their resume is a helpful tool for their recommenders to reference and use in order to capture the achievements of the student. We encouraged our students to start building their resumes this year so that they have an opportunity to make edits and updates over the next several months before submitting any applications next year. Most applications for colleges and some vocational programs will ask students to list the activities that they have completed throughout high school, in addition to the hours per week and weeks per year for each activity. It can often be difficult in these moments for students to remember everything they have done throughout their high school years. And so if they can work on their resume now, it will make the process of filling out these sections of applications a little bit easier for them down the road. Additionally, once students can see everything mapped out on paper, it helps them to reflect on everything they've accomplished so far and possibly see if there are other opportunities for involvement that could be added to their resumes over the next several months. You, as their parents and family members, can have some important roles in this process for students. Your students may need your assistance in remembering the different activities and community service that they have completed during their high school years. It can also be difficult for students to talk about themselves and showcase their own accomplishments, so they may need your support with this as well. We encourage you to collaborate with your students as they build their resume, as you can provide valuable input to them throughout this process. As Linda discussed earlier and showed us, and as we introduced students to Naviance this week, we showed them where they can find a resume template. The template we showed them is pretty standard and allows them to input information about their education, jobs, volunteer work, awards, activities, some of their skills, and then any courses that might be relevant to their future major or career choice. Also on Naviance, we provide an example of a resume that students can reference if they are unsure of what to put in different sections or how much information and details should be included. There is also information in the workbook that talks about suggested formatting and additional recommendations for information that the student can include in the different sections. Students should make sure to provide a brief description of each activity, service, and accomplishment using action words in order to provide a little context for the reader. Also, an important note is that for the resume, students should focus only on inputting information that is relevant to grades 9 and beyond. All of the counselors would be happy to review students' resumes as they are working on them to answer any questions and make sure that they are on the right track. We can also provide additional examples and templates if students would prefer to use something different than what's on Naviance. And that's all for resumes, and I will turn it over to Cindy Nelson to talk about interviews.
All right. I know it's getting late and a lot of information coming at you, so I'm going to make this pretty brief. But one thing that we did talk about with students was that for some schools or programs, or obviously if you're looking at working right after high school, an interview can be part of that process. So starting to think and prepare for that interview process is an important thing to do. So we did talk about some ways to prepare for that. There's some information in your workbook starting on page 16, so if you want to follow along there. But obviously a big piece is that preparation, and that's really thinking about, doing some research, reflecting on yourself, some of those questions that they might ask. And, for a lot of students, this can be really uncomfortable talking about yourself. Sometimes students struggle with writing about themselves with the essay, but talking can be even harder for a lot of students. So really practicing and reflecting and working with someone, whether it's a sibling or a parent or their counselor, but being able to do that practice in live, real time can be really helpful for students. So again, important to do some research so that when you're in that interview, you kind of know about the program or the job or the school that you're interviewing with. That can help you have really thoughtful questions that you're going to ask that are deeper than the information that's just on the website. That can help show some interest in that school and that you've taken your time to really do some research. We emphasize with the students as a two-way conversation. So it's not just about them interviewing you for that fit, but it's you interviewing them as well to make sure that it's a good fit for you as well. So really helping students understand that it's just as beneficial for them to make their decision as it is for that employer or school or program that they might be looking into. Let's see. Talking about like admission officers might ask about an academic program and just being prepared and that really that's a fair question, especially if, you identify or the student identifies, I'm interested in psychology. It's going to be common for that admission officer to ask the student to elaborate in that, like what have you done to already explore that interest or why are you interested in that? So really being able to express the why in things is really important kind of throughout that interview process. As Pam mentioned, when you're thinking about visiting, when you're looking on the website, if you see an interview as an option, it's a, optional part of the process. Definitely take advantage of that opportunity to meet with the admission representative. Again, it can be really helpful in finding that fit for your student and for the school. It helps demonstrate interest as well. A lot of schools do offer virtual opportunities for that. So if your student is looking at a school that's further away, that virtual opportunity may be available and something they can do. If an on-campus interview is really not, an option for your family, we can work with your student to maybe reach out to the school and kind of explain some obstacles in doing that interview if that's not something they can do. But it's important to kind of acknowledge that if it's a recommended or something that's an option that you're not able to do. But that's something to definitely look into as you're maybe planning visits this spring, summer. Is that something you could do while you're on campus? All right, if you want to move on to the next slide. So these are just some common interview questions that might be asked. A lot of these are in your workbook. And again, it's just good to start thinking about and helping your students start thinking about how they will respond to these. It's something we can help them kind of develop their responses to as well. But that tell me about yourself question, that can be a really hard, it seems very broad. It's hard to narrow down, like what are those key things I'm going to maybe talk about. So I always think about, maybe think about what would my best friend say about me? How would they describe me? And I want to make sure I'm talking about some of those qualities. What are my interests? What are those things that really make me excited? So really being able to be thoughtful and think about your response for that. The extracurricular question, it's not just like listing off, everything you've done, but again, that why. Why did you get involved in those things? What was the time commitment? What was really exciting about some of those things that you did? Was there any honors or things like that? So showing some emotion, some excitement in those things, it's showing that you would be an involved member of the new community that you would be joining. That why do you want to be a part of our campus, or why are you interested in this job? That's really important as well. It's going to demonstrate that you've done your research, you really know about that program or that job. So that's really important that you're specific and you can tie that into something that you have researched or that the student has researched. The major question, again, if your student is really gung-ho about a certain field, that should be easy to answer and talk about how they've already explored that major. That's really important for fields that are going to be more selective, like nursing. They really want to know that that student's going to stick with that major with the limited spaces that they have. So really thinking about why with that. And it's okay to be undecided. If your student is undecided, but maybe they have a few areas that they're interested in, that's okay. But they can talk about, what are those areas that they're interested in. The strengths or weakness question, again, they should be ready to answer, what are 3 or 4 of their strengths, what is a weakness, and how to spin that in a positive way, so that it doesn't, present itself as just a weakness. And tell me about your greatest experience in high school. Again, that's a very broad question, so it's important to kind of reflect and think about that one, and showing some enthusiasm for maybe there is a big project in school or a big sport event or accomplishment that happened, and kind of showing how that impacted you and helped you grow as a person. So again, the interview, whether it's, for a program, a job, a scholarship, could be a part of the admission process, but it can be, something that's pretty nerve-wracking, and the more preparation and practice that the student does, the more kind of smooth it will go, and we are here to help students kind of navigate that, because we know it can be daunting. I'm going to turn it over to Lisa, who's going to talk a little bit more about course planning for next year.
Thanks, Cindy. So while we have you here, we want to just touch base on course selection because it's also an important part of the admissions process. So your children were surprised by that when we brought that up in the workshops. We were like, senior year counts, and they were like, what? We thought junior year was the most important year, right? And we're like, no, all 4 years are important. So they were a little disappointed to hear that we're not promoting a lot of senior studies down in guidance. But they'll get over that. Anyway, so we're going to start course selection after February break, starting February 28th to March 10th. And again, like I've already said, senior year does count. So what we are sharing with students is that if your student is college bound, the admissions counselors look for students to continue to be enrolled in the core content areas of English, math, science, history, and world language. We tell students that if you decide to not enroll in, say, one core content area, you should make sure that you are enrolled in the other 4 content areas for a full year. Okay, so a student might have a passion for, say, world language. They might decide, like, you know what, I'm going to do a full year of world language, but maybe I'll only do a half year of, say, science, because that's not going to be my major. So we would make sure that they're enrolled in English, math, history for a full year, their world language class, and then, of course, that science class and additional electives. Vice versa, maybe the student decides, like, well, maybe I don't want to continue on with my language, then we would be looking for them to be enrolled in those other core content areas. And the reason being is when admissions counselors are reading those applications, of course, they're noting that your student is indicating maybe a particular major. Like Cindy said, maybe they're undecided. So they're looking at broad skills. They want to make sure that your student is going to be able to find success at their school. That's why we encourage them to continue to be enrolled in all of those core content areas and continue to develop those skills leading into college. Now, of course, we want students to continue to challenge themselves. There's a fine line between challenging yourself and overwhelming yourself. Right? We don't want them to overwhelm themselves, and we certainly don't want them to underwhelm themselves, right? So we want to make sure that we have that balance. Again, recognizing each and every one of us has our strengths. I was telling the students in the workshops, just look around our building. All of your teachers have strengths, and they're working in that area. Your math teacher is up on H300 for a reason. I'm in guidance for a reason. They're not in guidance for a reason, right? So we all have our strengths. So recognizing what are your students' strengths, challenging them appropriately, whether that is at the AP level or the honors level, and for some students that may continue to be at the CP level. And then recognizing what are areas where maybe they have to work a little bit harder, and making sure that you're balancing all of that, okay? So sometimes more is not always better, because sometimes we end up finding that students are taking on too much. They become overwhelmed with the workload, right? They may challenge themselves in an area where their skills aren't quite at that higher level. They end up focusing a lot of time and energy on that particular class, and it impacts their other classes. So really, it's all about identifying your students' strengths. What are their interests, right? Because some students are maybe taking an AP class that they don't even really have a strong interest in. So talking with them about what are you interested in, right? What are you good at? And then helping them to kind of bring balance to their overall schedule and challenging themselves, okay? All right, so let's see. In Naviance, you will see, and on the college websites, a lot of the colleges will put their requirements for admission. So that's the baseline for what they expect your student to have taken in order to be considered for admission. So that might be like 4 years of English, 3 years of math, a couple years of history. Now that's the baseline. And then they have the recommendations. So we always encourage students who are applying to the schools to be aware of what that recommendation is and to try to strive to meet some more of the recommendations versus just the requirements. I can honestly say that the graduation requirements that we have here at Algonquin, they do a pretty good job covering our students with the 4 years of English, minimum of 3 years of math, 3 years of history and science. So many of our students will be covered in the admissions process. When we start looking at the Massachusetts State Colleges and Universities, right, we require 3 years of math to graduate, but they're looking for a 4th year for admissions. So if your student is going to be applying to UMass Amherst, UMass Dartmouth, UMass Lowell, Westfield, Bridgewater, Framingham, whatever those schools might be, they are absolutely going to have that 4th year of math in order to graduate. All right, so we encourage our students to not just only continue the 4th year, they have to have the 4 years of English, but we encourage all of our students to enroll in that 4th year of math and continue to develop those overall skills. All right, so I think Andrea has up here where you moved off the 4-year course of study. This information will be on our website, but this is a tool we use to help students plan their course selections for the year. What it has done is we've outlined all of the graduation requirements based on each year. Students can be enrolled in up to 7 classes at any given time. And so this just kind of outlines all of the graduation requirements, what students are going to have to take. Of course, I already mentioned that students are going to have to continue with their English. They'll have a full year of English to graduate. We encourage the 4th year of math for admissions purposes to the Massachusetts State Colleges and Universities. And then depending on your students' interests, they might do a full year of science, full year of history, full year of world language. Your student's counselor is more than happy to talk with them. When we start having the individual meetings with the students, so we're going to start doing that right now, that is part of our discussion, is talking with your students about maybe what they're thinking about majoring in, identifying courses here at Algonquin where maybe they could explore some of those interests. I was saying that to the students today in the workshop. I was like, well, right now, it's free. You have an opportunity to explore some of the elective courses that we have here to help you to determine whether or not that is an area that you might like to major in, versus when you're in college and you're spending tens of thousands of dollars on some of these courses. So if there are courses here at Algonquin that are related to your major, senior year is a great time to really start taking some of those courses because it might help you to narrow that down. So we'll be meeting with students going over the 4-year course of study, making sure they have all their graduation requirements, and then tying their interests in their major, potential major into some of those decisions around electives that are being made. All right, and then we just have a quick little sample senior schedule that, again, I've talked about a lot of it. With the English, the math, they're going to have to do the health and fitness. That's a state requirement, making sure they have their economics, and then whatever other courses they may decide to enroll in to complete their senior schedule. We do the course selection process online through PowerSchool. Teachers will be making recommendations as they typically do. We encourage students and parents to heed the advice of the teachers. They've been working with your student for, an entire semester. I think they have a pretty good sense of what your student's strengths are, areas where they may need to work. And so we encourage students to really listen to the teachers as part of balancing their course selections. If you have questions about a teacher recommendation, if you're contemplating possibly doing an override, right, then you and your student should speak to the teacher. I think first and foremost, one of the things that we want to start to do is really develop those advocacy skills with your student. So I would have my child go and talk to the teacher first, because to gain a better understanding of, why did you recommend me for this math class? What are things that I can do to improve? If I improve, would you change my recommendation at the end of the year? So there's a lot of good conversation that can happen between your student and the teacher. So I would encourage you to have your student first approach the teacher. If after approaching the teacher you still have questions, as parents you can certainly reach out to the teacher and they would be happy to provide you with feedback. All right? But taking all of that information in, you do have the right to override a teacher recommendation, all right? And the override process is once you have talked to the teacher will share the override form with you and your child will complete that form and submit it by the deadline, which I think is March 13th, all right? Don't worry, we're going to send all this back out. All right, we'll send out a separate email around course selection, but we just want to make sure that we're hitting on a few topics while we have you here tonight. Another big thing that we always ask students to do, of course, is to pick alternative courses, because sometimes we get to senior year and students end up taking a lot more semester courses, so sometimes the pieces of the puzzles don't always fit together. So we ask them to give us additional pieces. So when we're creating this schedule, we try to enroll them in courses that of high interest to them. Okay? All right. So I think that I covered most of the course selection stuff, and again, we'll send some more information out after, all right? So just remember, make sure you send the message to your child that senior year does count, and we're not supporting a lot of senior studies, right? Okay, so one more piece of advice. We'll take some questions in just a minute. As I was listening to Linda talk and Pam talk and everybody talk about test scores and Naviance, and there was so much information flying around tonight. I can honestly say that your students entered these workshops and their lives changed this week. And how that changes is now every time you go to a family party, anywhere you go, everyone and their brother is going to be, what are you doing after you graduate? Where are you going to school? Everybody's going to have a lot of advice for your child, right? Your stress level is probably going to elevate. So I often encourage parents to kind of, set a time aside on the weekend to talk about, where you're at in the process. Talk about maybe what some of your next steps are going to be. Try not to make it an everyday conversation. So like when your child comes to sit down to eat dinner after a long day, probably not the time to talk to them about, did you get your list done yet? You know what I mean? So set a time aside on the weekend when everybody maybe is a little more rested, a little calmer, where you can have a conversation about like, okay, what schools are you looking at? How can I support you and help you to go visiting those schools? And I'll share that advice even as we move through the fall into the application process. The constant conversation about it sometimes I think causes undue stress. And always paying attention to some of those conversations that other people might be having with your child. Because sometimes, although they're well-intended, they may make offhanded comments like, oh, well, that's not a good school, or this is a good school, or that's a good school. Well, you know what? That's an individual decision that you and your child are going to make together, all right? So keep your ears open for that, because that will happen as well, all right? There's a lot of great opportunities out there. There is a place for every student for whatever they're deciding to do in their future, All right, so that's my last piece of advice, and we'll go ahead and take questions. Pam, you're going to help me with the Q&A? So if you have a question, please feel free to raise your hand. I'll bring the microphone around. We'll answer your questions. You want to? Yeah, we only have one. You want to use this one? Okay. Let me see if I can get this.
I don't know. I can hear you. I'm going to repeat it. That is an awesome question. So the question was, are there specific times during the year that are, ideal for visiting campuses versus maybe not ideal for visiting campuses? I always say to the kids, like, if you can get to some local schools around February that are nearby, I think that's a great time to visit.
Thank you.
However, always keep in mind that it is going to be cold and snowy, and we live in New England. So if you like it, you may want to go back again in April. I think April break is a good time to go. If you can find a time when schools are in session, then you can see the students there. I would recommend going during that time. I think, sometimes life happens and we can't always do during the breaks. And so I do have students that do the summer as well. So I think summer's fine. But ideally, if you can be there when there are students on campus, that can be, I think you can see the most of what's going on at the school when they're there.
Do we have other questions? No? You can ask another one, sure. Here you go.
It works? Oh, perfect. So if we go on a campus visit and the visit does not include a dorm visit as well, can we insist on it, or what do you recommend?
A dorm room visit? Is
Yes,
that
a
okay?
dorm room visit.
You can request it. Usually they do, and I'll be honest with you, usually the one they show you is the nicest freshman dorm they have. But they usually have a mock one set up. If not, I would ask and I would say, is there a reason why it's unavailable? And do you have pictures? And how many people per dorm? Just you want to make sure that there's not like tiny little triples that the kids are going to be staying in. Because I know I wouldn't want my kid applying to a school, going to the school, and then have no idea what the dorm looked like.
Any other questions? Sure.
Sure. So quick preview. In May, we're going to start telling students that they should be asking teachers for recommendations. We suggest one. I have been seeing schools that do ask for two. However, I usually sit with the student in our second meeting, because we'll do first meetings in the winter, early spring, and then we'll meet again in May. And that's usually when I say, okay, not the one you have the best grade in, but which teacher knows you the best. And then that way they have that locked in. I hope that he was able to find somebody to write for him. So I would say, though, for two, I usually say go with one, but then I'll look at their list real quick and I'll be like, okay, that one, let's double check. You might need two for that.
Yeah, I think it tends to be the more highly selective
Yes.
schools that require two, but for most students, they're covered with one letter. And we typically recommend the junior year teachers. Okay? Because those are the teachers that kind of know your student the best and kind of speak to their current skills. right? So, and they'll say, well, what about my freshman teacher? We're like, well, we're kind of hoping that maybe you have grown and matured and developed your skills a little in the past couple of years. We're hoping, right? So that's why we typically will say the junior year. Teachers, if a student had a teacher, maybe say freshman year, they're going to have them again senior year. We might say okay, but typically it's junior year teachers we're looking for. Sure.
For college essays, is it like the same essay goes to all the colleges they are applying, or it's like a separate essay for each college?
That's a good question. So if your child's using the Common Application, there will be one main essay that they then send, and that goes to all the colleges. However, more and more, we're finding colleges are giving students opportunities to write extra. So there'll be, like, even UMass has 2 super short ones. Why do you want to apply here is one of UMass Amherst, and then the second one is, you see yourself in a community, tell us about that community. So we are seeing more and more writing. I hope that answers your question. I could keep talking about writing forever.
Yeah, and we'll talk in our May presentation. We kind of go over what to do over the summer, and the topics that we talk about are the college essay, right? And how there's the main application essay, and then we talk about supplemental writing, which Pam was referencing with UMass. So sometimes there's always the essay for the main application that gets sent to all the schools, and then some schools have additional writing. And we'll go over all that. We'll open up the Common App and walk you through the Common App and point all of that out to you. And we do for the students as well. Yes.
So do you send both the weighted and the unweighted GPAs to the colleges? Or does it depend on the college?
So we only send weighted GPA to the colleges. We do not send an unweighted GPA to the colleges. They don't require it. Nope. They do not. Other questions? Here you go. Thank you.
So if you're visiting a college, you don't know if you like it yet, you get there, you visit it, do you do an interview at that time, or do you wait and see the college, see if you like it, and then either do a virtual interview or, travel back?
An alumni interview or
Yeah. What do you recommend?
I did.
So the question is, when you go to visit a school, you're not quite sure if you like the school or not. Should you interview at that time? And so I think that depends, right? I think typically we tell students if they're going to be applying to schools that are kind of considered more local and they're unsure as to whether or not, they're going to apply to the school, I would probably wait. Now, occasionally students might be visiting a school that's a little further away that might require an interview, right? Then you could definitely connect with the admissions office to see, should they do that interview when they're there on campus, or can they offer, like, say, an alumni interview after the fact, okay? So I would just check on that. But typically, I encourage students to first kind of make the decision, do they really like the school, before they go to interview, because I think if they're interested in the school, then they'll do more research, feel like they'll be a little better prepared. So I typically encourage my students to visit first and then look at the interview process. Yep.
I actually have 3 questions. The first one is there a strategy for a lot of these schools are not requiring SAT scores, a strategy around when you submit to those schools that are optional? Only if you're way above what they're required, or just at, or what's your thinking around that? That's my first question.
So the question is, for schools that are test optional, is there a strategy for submitting your scores? So I typically recommend to my students that if you are at or above the average SAT score, then you could submit those, because I do feel that further supports their application. If their scores, are further below, then I would probably encourage a student to go test optional.
And then on the Naviance, I noticed that there's a percentage for kids on campus. Does it have any information around, we know there's some schools guarantee housing for the first 2 years or the first year, and then after that they don't, and most kids are off campus. Is there a breakdown of that?
So I think the question with that was, when you see the percentage of students on campus, does that correlate with the housing availability? For 4 years? That's a good question. So when I'm looking at that number, I'm usually thinking that there's commuter students that maybe aren't taking advantage of the housing at all. So
I would probably, I would probably go directly to the
Yes,
school's
yeah.
website to get the information related to guaranteed housing. You know, because that's what you're asking, right? Like, how many years, you know, do they guarantee housing for your student, not just the percentage of students who live on campus. So, and I think that's a great question, even if you're going to an information session, right? To even ask as part of the information session if it's not offered. It might be offered up as part of the presentation, but it would be a great question. I would encourage you go directly to the admissions page just to make sure you have accurate information about the housing.
Yeah, I just asked that because we were surprised at one tour that we went to that the last 2 years there's no housing and you had to find something. Yeah.
Depends on the school.
Yeah. A co-op, information around on Naviance, which schools have co-ops?
Which schools have co-ops?
co-ops. So you would be looking at the individual schools on their websites.
Great questions. And you raised your hand, sorry. Yeah. I remember, I'm like, someone else raised their hand.
Yes, so just to double click on the question about the GPA. So, for example, in our case, Ms. McInnes, we moved from another country, and well, the transition of the grades, there are some specifics. So, do you submit on only one-digit weighted GPA, or you also submit all the transcripts, all the other subjects? All the other ratings for other subjects?
So typically when a student transfers into Algonquin, we transcribe the transcript, right? And then we afford the weighting based on whatever level course they took at their previous high school. And then that ends up equating to a weighted GPA here at Algonquin because we blend it in with the courses that they take here. Does that answer your question?
Does the college get just one number? Yeah,
Yes, yes, they get one number. No, oh, they see the grades. Is that what you're asking? Yes, they see the grades, and they will see the school that your student was at, and then they'll see the Algonquin courses that they've taken. So they'll see the school, they'll see all the grades, and then they'll have a weighted GPA on there as well. Okay? You're welcome. Other questions? Yeah.
Thank you. I just wondered if you had any advice on like summer pre-college programs and whether those are beneficial. I mean, I think they would be for like getting a feel for the school, but if you just had any comments.
So we tend to not overly promote pre-college programs for the reason is that they can be a little expensive, right? Not everybody can afford a pre-college program. With that being said, if your student, if you can afford to give your student an opportunity like that, and your student's going to be able to maybe explore their interests in a given major or something, right? Then they certainly could do that. If that's something that you and your child decide you can do as a family, they certainly could do that. It's not necessarily going to impact their admissions process, right? But it will help them kind of further explore what their interests are and maybe what might be a good fit for them and what and be on campus and stuff. So I guess that's a very individual decision to make. So we don't necessarily say, yes, everybody should be doing pre-college programs because that's not, affordable for everybody and not necessarily reasonable, So I think it's an individual decision. Okay, you're welcome. Yeah. I'll come back.
Just one more question. Service, do you see a trend with colleges looking for kids to have service? And how important is that if that's the case?
Do we see a trend in colleges wanting kids doing service?
Oh, okay.
Yep.
So what we've seen with the schools is that they really put value on whatever the student's chosen to do with their time in high school. So if your child has done, the ski club, or Model UN, since the 9th grade, and has a little bit of volunteer work here and there, I think that's great. I don't want families to think that they need to rush out and just bang out 100 hours of community service right now, because that also looks a little strange. So I would say really the most important thing when it comes to activities is that your child finds joy in it, that there's a trend of them continuing it over the past 4 years, and then if they've been able to take any leadership in it. So I do think that service work is wonderful, but if your child has chosen to do different things with their time, then colleges are going to look at that the same way.
What is the maximum weighted GPA? The reason I'm asking this question, because in some towns, it goes beyond 5 also, what I have seen with the other students. But when I see online, or if I see on Algonquin, it shows if I think you have AP courses, it's 5, and if it's CP courses, it's 4. So can you please explain it a little bit more about the GPA?
So you're asking what is the highest GPA. So what we do, so yes, if you take an AP course, right, and you get an A+ in the AP course, you can get a 5.0, right? So most students don't take all AP courses and get all A+, right? So it's impossible, near impossible for students to have a 5.0. What we do is we report out, so when we send off applications in the fall, we send out what we call our school profile, and we highlight different information about Algonquin, right? Whether it's the courses that we offer, our grading scale, might be our AP score averages, things like that. And in addition, we report what the highest GPA is in the class, so that they have an understanding of where your student falls, right? So your student, if we're on a 5.0 scale, your student might have a 4.2. And they're like, whoa, wait a minute, it's a 5.0 scale. But the reality is the highest GPA in the class might be a 4.42, right? So we report the highest and the lowest GPA in the class to give them that range of where our students are falling. Because, of course, we have them taking PE classes and, the digital literacy courses and stuff like that that are at the college prep level. So when it's all averaged in, they can't quite achieve at that level, right, with their courses. So we report out the highest GPA to frame that up for the colleges. Okay, you're welcome. Hi.
So how do colleges know about the volunteer services or extracurricular activities? Is it mainly through essays, or do you guys submit something?
So one area where that could be recorded, volunteer services, extracurricular, is a resume, if that's something that you can include. However, the Common Application has a portion where you're going to list your activities. Mm-hmm. We're going to cover that in May when we talk about what to do over the summer.
Yeah, about Navia's system. So when you show on the screen, we can see all the the school's information and whether it's a match or reach or safe. So my question is, do I need to log into a student, use a student to log in to see all these information, or I can just log in as a parent to view this information? And also, as I log in as a parent, can I see the student's resume and also the student's list of schools, all this information?
Yes, so there are parent accounts for Naviance. I believe that they were sent out earlier this year. However, if you don't have access to it, please reach out to your child's guidance counselor and we can get it to you.
Yes, and you can see that information.
Yes.
So you can see, what your students' list of schools looks like, right? You can see the information for the different colleges, and you were asking about, can I see the scattergrams and how your child plots on those? So you can see that information through the parent account.
I saw maybe a couple of months ago, I don't see this information. So is that just coming out now? Or?
You didn't receive Naviance information?
No, I received Naviance information.
Okay.
But I logged in as a parent account. I didn't see the like schools, like what type of school based on the GPA or SAT.
Oh.
These kind of information.
Well, we probably haven't done that yet.
Okay.
So you were a little ahead of the game, right? You beat us to the punch. So the counselors will be meeting individually with students and adding schools. Students will be going in and adding schools. So as that information is populated, in addition, we needed like PSAT scores for students and the GPAs in there. So now as that information is populated, you'll be able to start to see more of that information. Okay? Yep.
Do you guys keep statistics on how many kids get into their REACH schools?
How many get in? We don't necessarily keep stats on how many get into their REACH schools. Right. So, but we keep the data. The data in Naviance kind of outlines that for you. You know what I mean? So,
Last year, out of all the kids that went to college that applied to the REACH school, did they go? Or
So
did
we-
they get in, I should say?
So we don't necessarily track like, this is my REACH school, this is Andrea's REACH school, this is Cindy's REACH school, and did we all get in? We don't necessarily track that, no. But we do have all the data points in there that kind of frame out, whether it's a REACH realistic or a safety school for a student. Yeah.
When you had a school up there and you were showing the acceptance rate, I was confused about, is that the acceptance rate for Algonquin students or the college in general?
So the information that we have on Naviance it's actually all Algonquin. So the acceptance rate is Algonquin.
Right. Sure.
Do you provide information and support students with summer internship programs?
Internships, we are beginning that process. We just recently hired a new career exploration and innovation coordinator, and so we're starting to do that work, starting to kind of do the outreach. I think you may have received an email from Mr. Bevan, right, asking about parents if they'd like to be participate in career days, offer job shadows, offer internships at your work. So there's lots of opportunities for parents to volunteer in that area here at the high school. And so we're starting to kind of build our base of contacts so that we can start to share that out with students. Yep. So it's very much on the horizon.
So this is really a follow-up on that statistics question about the REACH schools. So can we request the counselor that we are assigned to maybe advocate for our student with the REACH schools? Does that work?
So will their counselor advocate for them? Well, the counselors will write letters of recommendation on behalf of your student, which is a form of advocacy for your student, but not necessarily like calling the admissions offices, all right? But they will frame up a nice letter advocating on behalf of your student, highlighting your student's strengths, right, as part of the admissions process along with the teacher recommendations.
So the recommendation letters that the students have to get from the junior teachers, do they do it now and use it, or do they get it later next year?
So we're going to talk about that in May. We'll have the students ask in May.
Yeah.
That way they'll have a longer time to get to know the teacher. And the teacher will have more to write about.
Yeah. Do you have other questions? Okay, I'm coming back there. That's good, I sat at my desk a lot today, so you can just keep making me run back and forth across the auditorium.
Sorry.
Don't be sorry, it's good.
This is about SAT testing. You mentioned earlier that if a student performs well on Module 1 for reading and writing, then the overall score is better. Is it likewise for math as well?
Yes. Thank you.
So we have a lot of great questions, right? Some pertaining to this presentation, some to the May. We do have the college panel coming up on Thursday, February 29th. I think that is another great opportunity for students and parents because we will have the admissions counselors here, right? Little captive audience. We'll hear directly from them regarding the admissions process and what they're looking for, and they'll give advice to students, and we'll also be able to, they'll take questions. All right, so that's another great opportunity that is in the morning on February 29th. Okay, so we look forward to seeing you there. We'll start working with your students individually, and if at any point you have questions, please feel free to reach out to your student's counselor. Okay, have a great night, and thanks for all the great questions.